All right. Hey guys, I feel like it's been a while. Yeah. I think it has been a while. I think when I take a break from YouTube, talking on the camera seems amazingly odd and strange. um but yeah, I mean, what does it mean to catch people up on things? or update people on things? I would say, past, I would say like life started taking what I perceive as like a more struggle kind of route the moment I kind of graduated. Um, so, but I think things are getting better, and better is such a I don't I don't like the term better. I like the term maybe self preservation. Hi, Sam. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about that. Um, so yeah, my health I think is okay right now. It's durable. It's can be endured. I think I am getting better. Um, I went to my primary today. So I'm getting a bunch of testing done and stuff. So we'll see. Let's see what comes about with that. Um, and also, so just like I think my last update that I did was on Substack, and I was also struggling with like what to do with like my career choice or like my path. Luckily, and I'm very thankful that everybody gave me comments, Sam included. Um, but there was one particular comment by Matthew Stanley. He actually didn't comment on it. He actually gave me a whole email in return, um, recommending to me like to not go to law school. Don't even think about that. And he understood it was like unsolicited advice, but he did recommend to me something that I didn't expect before, which was he was like, after him knowing me for a little while, he's like, I think your personality fits quite well with like an MA in social work. And I actually totally forgot about the possibility of masters in social work, becoming like a social worker in a sense. Um, and so I actually really like the idea, and I like the idea mainly because it seems like getting a master's in social work is one of those degrees that you can just like add on a bunch of things to it once you get it. You can choose to become like a counselor, a medical advocate. You can help people with resources. You could literally become a therapist. You can become a psychotherapist. You could just add so many things. And yes, thank you, Sam. Yeah. No, I really like the idea. I thought it was great. So it seems like it seems like a great degree that you can just like add a plethora of things to it, a plethora of qualifications that kind of just, um, it just seems like a degree that just opens doors to just, a lot of things that you might want to do or might be interested in. Um, so I just, I'm pretty sure people can say that about lawyer degrees and so on, but I actually like that idea better. So I will say I am pretty set on that idea now. Um, the only unfortunate thing that I was discovering was that I think ASU, Arizona State University, I went to U of A, University of Arizona. Um, I'm not a fan of like online programs, so that's my thing. I actually think like online programs are always much more difficult because the dogs go crazy. um, yeah, I find these programs more difficult online because like basically what would count as participation is like what you have to do as work for a online program, um, like just showing up for class and like doing like the class activities that you would do that are generally easier. Online programs I've noticed like, or at least online classes, I can't say online programs, but online classes um, generally constitute like much more work, in that sense. And so I find it inconvenient. But anyways, my whole spiel for this was that I just wanted an online, I kind of, not online, I wanted a kind of on campus. So ASU is the only one that kind of offers a online campus. I mean, not online, on campus offers it a kind of on campus person. Um, so I'm deciding to apply there. I'm still open to, I guess you could say, the other online programs available in my area and schools, but I really want an on campus one. So the only caveat to applying there is I have to do 240 hours of like community service, and they're very specific about how it's done. Like it has to be specifically people in need, so I can't like work at an animal shelter. I can't like do these other weird things that, I mean, well, not weird, but like things that other people do or generally count as like community service. So in that sense, like I don't even think it's like called community service. They just called like human services. They specifically said like human services. And you have to have like, and there are other criteria for this. It's like you have to have real like face-to-face contact with these people. So you can't just be like a volunteer at a front desk or something, or just doing like administrative work. But anyways, I've reached out already to like one volunteer organization, which I think looks pretty good. So I'm currently getting that going. You know, I would like to put my application in August, but that means, you know, that means I'm gonna have to put in a lot of work essentially. Like, you know, not only am I trying to pick up more shifts because I need money at work, but also I'll be probably trying to volunteer as much as I can while I'm off to get the hours I can so I can apply for the program in time. We'll see if that all works out or whatever. I mean, I really don't want to push it back. You know, I don't want to wait like another fall or another like, you know, yeah, because I think they're always like a fall semester start. I wouldn't want to wait. Um, you know, because one, like I'm kind of depending on my GI Bill, my veteran bill to give me money for like living expenses as well. And so like, because my current job doesn't really give me enough, you know, so money is tight in a way. um, so yeah, like it's a little bit of pressure to get the ball rolling so I can, you know, continue part time and you know, get money from the military, my time. You know, basically, I'm just like, I just need to have money to buy time for myself so that way I can get this degree. Um, and then I can start making, you know, a little bit more comfortable money um, for myself. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the plan. So, that's, yeah, that's my little kind of goal oriented idea, direction, plan. Um, and then I've been reading this one book. So I've been still reading Nietzsche. Like I'm very much in love with Nietzsche right now. Like I really do think like books that aren't books that don't pull you in, and like this is really interesting. Like um, philosophy books, we tend to talk about like as the exception. Like no, if you want to understand philosophy, like there's a bunch of oughts, right? Like you should read Hegel and like you should read Deleuze and like you should read Kant and like all this other stuff. Or if not, then you're not serious about philosophy. But then, you know, there's like the more very like arbitrary value making that we're doing when we're saying these things. And it's kind of like, well, there's really no good ought really in this sense. Um, like the people that really like Hegel should just read Hegel, right? And then the people that um, really like certain philosophers should continue to read these philosophers. But anyways, I've always enjoyed like the more pessimistic philosophies. But Nietzsche in particular is a very interesting philosopher for me because Nietzsche like rides this, in my opinion, like this very beautiful tragic line between pessimism and um, like a more optimistic philosophy. which I really enjoy, because Nietzsche would basically say like, well, becoming itself is innocent, so there's nothing inherently positive and then there's nothing inherently negative. Like anything that we interpret about life either being inherently negative or inherently positive about being is like, for Nietzsche, that's like you just creating those values. Like you are the measure of life, but like also life allows you to give measure to it, you know? So in that sense, like, you know, Nietzsche is saying like, yeah, you create these values from which you interpret life, and then you're saying that life is meaningless or worthless, or life is actually meaningful and so purposeful and so on. Like Nietzsche is saying like, yeah, you create those things. But I think like the tragic element that Nietzsche is always trying to point out is like, well, the tragic part is like, yeah, you created those things. Um, you know, so I do like Nietzsche's philosophy in a sense, because it very rides like a very beautiful middle ground between like a more optimistic philosophy and a pessimistic one. Like you could probably like, I think Emil Cioran, like this was always interesting. Like Emil Cioran would say like Hegel's philosophy is very optimistic, um, versus like Schopenhauer's. But then even like Nietzsche, like, you know, had his own critiques about Schopenhauer. But anyways, um, so yeah, I generally like pessimistic philosophy. Um, Nietzsche is fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, I generally like pessimistic philosophy, like Julie Rash and all that. I'm still like hesitant about going into Schopenhauer, like, because like I know there's a certain part, like there's a certain early period of Schopenhauer where he's like very methodical and like very systematic, and I might find that very boring very quickly. I don't really know. Um, but I know there's a one book that I found myself quite interested in, because I guess this is like where Schopenhauer begins to take a turn, and like he starts writing more like aphoristic, and like he's more sentimental. And I was like, oh yeah, I think this is the part. I think this is the Schopenhauer probably that Nietzsche probably liked. And I was thinking like, oh yeah, I think I would probably like this version of Schopenhauer better, but we'll see. I'm still thinking about that. But anyways, I picked up this book, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race by Thomas Ligotti. Ligotti, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. What's really fascinating about reading this book is like Thomas is actually a supernatural horror fiction writer, and this is his first work. This is his first work on like having a philosophical take on life. Um, I would say like he's not so far. I mean, I'm only 22 pages in, but I will say that right now he's not, like, to me everything that he's saying is like kind of like already what I've heard before. You know, in some ways like Nietzsche has probably already said it better. And then, you know, people like Julie Rash has also kind of already said these things, but I believe this book was published before Julie Rash's work came out. So in that sense, like it would be the opposite, right? Like if I had read this first, I'd be saying like, I don't think Julie Rash is actually saying anything new. Um, but like her book specifically was like attack on, like it was like a twofold attack, more of just like on positive psychology. That was like its main critique, and then like there's a subsequent critique that is more like ontological and existential. But like I would say the main one is like the positive psychology. So it's more psychological in that sense. But like Thomas Ligotti, so far he's more like kind of giving you a run through of like pessimistic philosophy. Um, he's specifically talking about, and Julie Resch actually brings him up. His name is oh man, he's like a Norwegian philosopher, Zafi. He wrote like a very pessimistic short book called The Last Messiah. And so Zafi is Zafi. I think it's Zafi or Zafi. That's his last name. Um, he has a very strong pessimistic existential take. And so Thomas is kind of helping us go through that and showing us, I think so far, some of the words that I like that he's using. And I think he's getting at this idea is like entertaining this idea of like us being like a puppet, like Pinocchio, um, and how existentially horrifying that would be to be a puppet, but like there's no puppet master. We're just like an actual puppet. Like no, like he's using an analogy, not actual puppet, but like in some sense, sure. And he's talking in some ways like how horrifying it would be to understand and realize that if reality is the way it is, um, then we would just be like puppets, but like self-conscious. Like to be a self-conscious puppet would be a very interesting and horrifying um, endeavor. And then in that sense, like we would have to lie to ourselves. We would have to throw a deception about reality to ourselves, because it's like, well, how could we not have some type of power, some type of being to like choose and so on? But it's a very interesting concept to entertain, like this idea of like a puppet and like reality as being like horrifying. Um, and like I think this is the main point. This is why he brings up Zafi as well, like because Zafi argued like consciousness can actually be horrifying. Like at one point in our evolutionary process, and this is like all assuming we accept these things, like evolution, concept of evolution. I think most people do, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, um, at one point we were very unconscious, but then we became conscious about ourselves. And I think this is like how Thomas's argument of like being a puppet is very interesting. Because being unconscious would be like not realizing you're a puppet, and then being more conscious would be like understanding like, oh yeah, maybe I am like a live puppet. Because what's fascinating about this is like the more we go into like science, and like Nietzsche already starts talking about this too, is that science starts revealing to us like actually we don't, whatever we understand as free will is not the free will that we think it is. you know like there's a bunch of things that drive us, right? Like hunger, we have our emotions and so on. There's even like when I was taking a sociology class about happiness, they're doing studies about like court cases, and they're saying like judges gave harsher critiques, like harsher punishments, because it would be like during the time of lunch, and you're like, wow, that's horrible. Like that actually should be fixed. Like there should be no judgment until after lunch. Um, like for me, that would actually be taking the idea seriously that we might be like puppets in some sense. But anyways, yeah, I mean, I think I just enjoy reading pessimistic philosophy and philosophy like Nietzsche's. Um, of course, Of course, Nietzsche doesn't call his pessimistic. He's more like a tragic philosopher. He calls himself that in Ecce Homo. He's a tragic philosopher, so he's a tragic philosophy. Obviously, this roots from like his like admiration of the Greeks. But you know, you could say like I'm giving this main spiel mainly because it's like there's really no right ought in terms of like philosophy books. I'm just saying like these are the things like I started to really enjoy. And the one thing that I really like about pessimistic philosophy, and people like Julie Resch and all them, is like they understand like there's really no point in arguing for like a pessimistic philosophy, because then you understand like you're actually understanding pessimism to like its highest degree in some sense, because you have to be pessimistic about people even believing like that maybe reality might be this way. And there's really nothing you can do about it. Like you can't convince anybody away from this. Even to like argue for it is like, very positive. It's like you're starting to become optimistic. Like, oh, well, if I just argue and say the right things, like I could change their mind. So I've always liked pessimist philosophy in that sense. I don't really know why, and this is why I also like reading Nietzsche, because Nietzsche talks about these things like, we are a being filled with desire, contradictions, emotions, sensations, just a plethora of really sensations, and um, our disposition drives us as well. Like a certain degree of our disposition like frames the way we look at things. Um, and then, you know, the thing about pessimism and like Nietzsche's philosophy combined is like, well, I shouldn't be afraid to be an idiot, like I should be okay with being an idiot. It's okay to be an idiot. I think it's when we actively strive to not be an idiot um, that we're probably most idiots. you know um but yeah, I mean, I've always, these are like a lot of just the thoughts that kind of go in my mind about pessimistic philosophy, reading Nietzsche. And yeah, I mean, I think you should just read the philosophy that you enjoy, honestly. I mean, this is the very like cliche line, right? Like life is short. Like if I were to make it less cliche, I would just say, well, like you're a finite being, so. And I think, I mean, my argument, I would say, or this is just my opinion and my judgment, is that like I think people that read philosophy books that they enjoy give better readings, just by virtue of, I think. Like I think if we spent less time like reading the things that we have to read for philosophy, I think it just increases the amount of bad reading that is happening, versus like if you're reading a thinker and you're like, oh yeah, I think he really has something here and I'm really passionate about reading him, like I think it completely transforms like one's life, one's being, and then it also starts adding new ideas to the table, so like I think it's much more beneficial to read one that you adore, like and so on, versus like, oh yeah, I have to read Levinas or I have to read Hegel because I want to understand reality in a certain way. It's like, yeah, I mean, you should, but like, these things all come in variance in your life. And there can always be a point in time where like, yeah, it might be a better time to read Hegel when you're 45 versus like when you're 20, because like it allows life to grow on you a bit. And then you're like, oh, okay, like maybe it is time. And maybe I do like Hegel now. But we never really know about these things. It's possible that you never end up reading Hegel in your life. But I'm just giving examples of like, fundamentally, I just think it's better to just read what you enjoy reading. I think we should be more bold about that. We should have more courage about being okay with putting books down that don't really intrigue us anymore. We're skipping parts that don't really intrigue us, and just being being, just being a being that is contradictory and has desires and wants and finds certain things pleasurable and enjoyable and not. Um, it's also like a side of creativity, I think, if we do this. But yeah, that's my spiel. That's my update. That's what I've been thinking. This is what I've been thinking lately. This is how I've been feeling lately. And then the direction I'm heading towards, direction I'm feeling. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and thank you, Sam, for all the comments here. You said, I think the difficulty I have with Schopenhauer is that he comes from a place of resentment toward the people in his life, and I think that affects his views. Yeah, absolutely. And like that's the other thing about like Nietzsche that I'm really fascinated by is like Nietzsche. I can understand like where Heidegger gets his philosophy from in a very like big way, because like Heidegger's whole letting be stuff, I think, really starts coming from Nietzsche. Like looking at Schopenhauer as somebody that had resentment. Like, could we have prevented that? Like what were the social things that drove Schopenhauer? Like if we actually think about like the conditions that Schopenhauer was set in, um, how much will did he have when he wrote his philosophy? Um, and like this is why I always like Nietzsche's comment about like a lot of our philosophies are just really just like biographical, you know. Um, and so like when we encounter something like this, that's what always poses an interesting question to me. Is like, okay, if we suppose that our philosophies are just what's autographical about us, like what we are subjected to as subjects, like the conditions that we're subjected to, then it makes reading at an entirely different level because it's now it's like not like, oh, Schopenhauer could have been a different way if he just chose differently, um, versus like, oh, this is interesting, like this is what allows for difference to happen, but then it makes life complicated because difference is what makes life more complicated and more chaotic and frustrating for us. But then also it's like, well, how could we live in a world where we are beings similar like puppets, where we're not really able to control the conditions that we are sort of caught in historically or contingently? And it's like, how can we love in that sense? How can we really love? And like, for me, like, these are all the questions like Nietzsche brings up for me. Like, how can we really love in a world that is proposed like this? Versus like, it seems infinitely easier to love in a world where we can always say like, yeah, like someone could have just done differently and they didn't. And like, that's why they deserve what they deserve. Um, like it just seems infinitely easier to do that versus like a more helpless and like fruitless state of just like, oh yeah, like I'm not sure what could have been done, you know? Like these were the popular ideas that were kind of like a part of their time or our time, and we're just like subjected to them. So yeah, I mean Nietzsche has always made me think about those things a lot. I'm still thinking about those because I'm still trying to entertain like what does it mean to live in a world that is necessary? And what does it mean to live in a world where becoming is innocent? Like, there's nothing inherently bad about becoming, and there's nothing inherently good about it. Um, but yeah, all right. The book cover looks cool. Yeah, I totally agree. I totally love the book. I totally love the book cover. Um, I feel like a little conspiracy theorist when I'm reading this book publicly. I'm like, oh no, people are getting the wrong ideas about me. Like I'm going for the big conspiracy, right? I'm not going for like Pizzagate or something, I'm going for like the big one, like against the human race. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I also enjoyed Julie Resch's critique on positive psychology. Found that very helpful. But all right, that's all I got to say. Thanks for watching.